Everyone ready? No test? No. All right, well, you've got this first half an hour to go through your notes. Use this time to study. The quiz will open at 9 a.m., so right at 9 o'clock. So this is kind of how all of your official quizzes are going to run, your tests and pracs. They'll start at around 9, and it'll only open for that short amount of time. Remember, I told you guys you're only going to have one attempt at this, so it's not like our in between lesson quizzes that we've been doing. This is a proper test for you guys on branding. So nothing on elements of design or design thinking, none of that is being asked. This is specifically on branding itself. It's a short quiz, 20 minutes or so. They're not always going to be that short, but this is how long this one's going to be. So at 9 o'clock, you guys can log into your portal. It's going to be open for you guys, and then you can start. All right, cool. Yes. Because I just said it.
How many marks?
How many marks? That's a tough one. It's not really on how many marks. It's basically how much you passed by.
How much?
Passed by. So everyone should know more or less what your pass rate is. 50 or so. 50. Yeah. So the reason why I'm saying that is because the number of questions differ depending on each test. So this one has around 17. Right? 17. Yeah. True and false, multiple choice, yes. Can't answer that. Yeah. Maybe one or two to expect. Like I said, it's different for every quiz. So I can't tell you exactly what you're going to be getting in there, but you might not. Colby? Yeah. Tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we do. Okay. All right. So don't worry about grades, everything now, guys. It's a pretty basic test. It's your first test that you'll be doing. As the semester goes, they will, of course, get harder. Right? More questions, more typing questions, and so on. Okay. All right, cool. So you have until now, until 9. I'll come in, tell you guys when you can start and when that's open, but use this time to study. Oh, and also reminder, you'll have a typography quiz next week, Monday. All right. Yes. Testing. All right, guys, I think everybody's done. So how was that? It was okay. Hey, not as bad as you thought it was going to be. Okay. So of course, when it comes to any typing out questions, you won't be getting anything back immediately because someone does have to go through and mark those types of questions. Okay, but I think as you guys were going at the end, you did see in your multiple choice, your true and false, any that you could have gotten wrong and so on. Now, from that, of course, that was now your first official test. So well done to everybody. I think everyone did quite well. Okay, so you guys can give yourself a pat on the back. Cool. There you can. All right, awesome, guys. So well done on that. All right, so yesterday we had an entire discussion on typography. Okay, we went through the styles of type, the different types of fonts that we can come across on, and who can tell me what our two main font categories were? Serif and sans serif, correct. Now, what's the difference between the two? Okay, so serif has a little tails. Sans serif is without those tails. Okay, now when would we use a serif font? Where is that most commonly used? In body copy. And our sans serif is usually for your headings and your titles. Now, that's not to say you won't see serif fonts being used for headings and so on. You see them in magazines. What type of, should I say, companies would use a serif font? Fashion brands, jewelry. Think of high-end jewelry, anything that's meant to be dainty, delicate, and so on. That's when we would use that type of font. So those were our two main categories, serif and sans serif. Then we took a look at special typefaces as well. Can anyone give me a few of those? What's considered a special typeface? Decorative, handwriting, script. So anything that was like, for example, script have your exaggerated twirls and curves that you'd see mostly in your wedding invites. Decorative, as we saw, it had a little bit more texture, a bit more almost like a graphic style towards those fonts. And so we took a bit to identify where those were used in magazines. We went on to CC Express in between for you guys to identify those types of fonts. And I think everyone managed to do that quite successfully. Then after we spoke about our fonts, we went into talking a bit about spacing. We looked at line spacing for leading, and we also looked at word spacing as well. Can anyone remember those two terms? Tracking and kerning, right? And what were those for? They're between pairs, you can say between pairs of letters. So tracking equal amounts of space between each letter in a word, and kerning is typically between pairs. And so we looked at examples of that. You guys got a chance to try that out yourself within CC Express as well. And then towards the end of the day, we spoke about the use of visuals and how beyond just using imagery within our designs, which is what we've seen a lot of, we spoke about how we could also take text and treat text in a way that it almost becomes its own little graphic visual piece. We refer to this as exploding type, taking text and making it large across the page. We spoke about what other forms of visuals? Pardon? Illustration. Okay, having a cartoony design with our visuals. What else? Clip art. So remember, clip art was also referred to as ready-made graphics that you would be able to find and use within your designs. We also spoke a little bit about information graphics, infographics, and we said when someone would use these types of icons, charts, bars, would be to present information. Anything that makes use of statistics, numbers, facts, because it gives more impact when we can see a visual representation of that, when we can see colors and make connection with that information. Otherwise, if it's just plain text, it's going to get lost. People aren't going to want to read that. So infographics does fall under a visual. We spoke about graphic elements, which we tied back into our elements of design with the use of lines, shape, and form to both add visual interest and also to be able to divide our pages into different sections for content as well. And then lastly, after graphic elements, we took a look at illustrations, clip art, as we pointed out, and then the use of photographs. So we spoke a little bit about what would have been done in terms of technique and Photoshop usage and so on. So that was what we covered in yesterday's session. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, awesome. Cool. So moving on from this to tie up our visual aspect, beyond just making use of simple images, graphics, and illustrations, we can also move on to adding special effects and filters to our imagery as well. If you have a look at our two examples, let's have a look at the brown layout at the top. Okay. This is almost for a musical play that's happening. Now, if we look at the use of the colors, the way the image has been treated, what can you tell me the message is behind something like this? Can we tell, or do we think this is a happy musical? Looks more serious. Something a bit more dramatic, for example. Okay, serious, dramatic. It's giving like a sad musical. we are sad, that she is sad. We're supposed to be sad with her. So if you look at the combination, we spoke about colors in our elements of design, the use of the brown sort of burnt vintage effect. We can kind of tell that perhaps the setting of this is not present, right? It was a couple years ago, right? In a different era, a different time period. Now, if we're looking at the way the imagery was treated, okay, we've got what we would refer to as a feather or fade off into this bolding at the back. Now, from this, if I can give you a bit of context behind it, it is, of course, in French, but we can tell that perhaps this musical is about following the journey of this woman, right? She's by herself. Perhaps she comes from a tough life or wherever she's running from. And of course, this place serves importance because it's on that poster. It kind of looks like an embassy, for example. Maybe she's trying to get away from somebody. And with the use of visual effects, to be able to combine images in a way, we can kind of give almost like this dreamy look to it, like a memory, something that we are seeing through her eyes. Instead of just having the bolding plonked on, her plonked on, then it sort of creates a disconnect. So special effects refers to being able to add these different terms of color changes, fade outs, having what we call a vignette. You guys know what a vignette is? All right, school pictures, where you've got that dark border that's around and it's bringing focus to your face. Being able to use vignettes, distortion for imagery if you want to make something look kind of trippy or confusing to the eye. Blurring images as well. That's what falls under special effects. And by being able to use things like that within the design, you can help further push a message and an emotion. Now, these types of effects, where do you think we would be doing this type of editing? Okay, Lightroom, Photoshop. Now, Photoshop is where you want to go for these types of effects. Lightroom is an image editing software, but it's very different from Photoshop in the sense that in Photoshop, I can take a picture of you guys and I can take all of you and put you in Paris. In Lightroom, I can't do that. I have to work with you guys in this room. Photoshop is meant for composition making, special effects, and things like this. Other examples would be referred to as a duotone, being able to give somebody a double tone effect. Very useful for things like music, because of course this was meant to be something that was exciting, trending, colorful, and eye-catching. So when you're getting images and you're using them, often designers would go and add these types of special effects to be able to push that message. So that is to add on to the visuals that we would have already used and got. Okay, any questions about that? All right, cool. So we spoke a lot about now the visuals, finished that topic off, and we spoke a bit about font usage as well. Couple of other things to consider when it comes to your designs and to your layouts, and it's things that we've seen throughout the past couple of weeks, was when you have information that you need to put on a design, right? We need to understand what is important. So if you take a look at, oh, let's jump down there. Okay, let's look at this design over here. We've got before and we've got an after, right? Now, if we look at the before element, there's a lot going on here. Okay, that was one of the things we identified quite consistently, that often designers will take a job and they'll take a layout and they'll just add everything onto it. Let's say that the context of this was, we as the designers got asked to create a little t-shirt graphic that spoke to riding the waves. And so we took that information and we decided we were just going to put everything that had to do with surfing within that graphic. We put surfboard, we put the palm trees, we've got another surfboard, another guy on the surfboard, and we've also got a lot of text on here as well. Now, if this was a graphic element for a brand, a lot of it doesn't need to be there. There's no emphasis here on what the main focus point is supposed to be. So rather, we take something like this, and remember we said often less is more. Okay, less is more. You can still be visually creative. You can still be fun and exciting, but we don't need to bombard people with different elements that we need to look at throughout the design. Keep it simple, have something that's larger and in focus. And we've already got the idea that this is on a beach. We've got palm trees, we've got seagulls, and we've got a car with a surfboard. We don't need to depict people surfing around it. We don't need to have a surfboard shown 10 times. So when you get given a design, you must decide on what needs to be emphasized. Remember, you can't display everything as important. Then there's no context behind it. There's no focus point. So careless composition can create confusion in the reader's mind, and the reader then just blanks out when they don't understand something. So we refer to this as just displaying all or displaying nothing. So we can't make everything equally important within a design. Take a look at this business card, for example. How do you feel about this business card? Too much information. What does Paul do? So here's another example of taking too much information and trying to put it on something as small as a business card. Business cards fit in your wallet, right? They're tiny. Business cards are meant to just have your contact information, your name, your company logo. There's no need to go adding in things like quotes and so on to that business card. Nobody's interested in that. So later on, when we get more into our design principle side of things, and we take a look at business cards, you will see the proper principles when it comes to laying out something like a business card. What information you should include, how to space that out appropriately. But for now, we never want to have all of our information on one piece. So it's either we need to decide what are we emphasizing, what needs to stand out. Very similar to our Ride the Waves. Okay. So that, of course, connects well with our layout and our design. We spoke a lot about this as well, with being able to make sure we've got flow, as you guys pointed out, make sure the reader's able to understand what they are talking about, and making sure your message is also easy to understand and consistent. So that also relates quite heavily to our layout and design. When you guys are later on going to be creating your magazine pieces, your adverts, everything should sort of fit together like a puzzle piece. Your visuals need to connect with what you are talking about. They mustn't look like they've just been placed onto your page last minute and awkward to the side. We saw an example of that yesterday as well. They must connect well with each other. Your text must connect with what you're talking about. You mustn't leave awkward spacing along our pages. So that is what we mean when we say your design must fit together like a puzzle piece. And we also saw that in the magazines that you guys were looking at yesterday as well. So that kind of now everything we've talked about carries on into your design. Okay, so that was just to solidify what we've been speaking about. Okay. We spoke about type as well, the use of typing to communicate that message. We said it needed to be attractive and so on. And we also spoke about how type can communicate a mood and a feeling. So just recapping what we spoke about yesterday. All right. Now, what I'd like you guys to do is just come ahead and grab some of these magazines off the table like yesterday, because we're going to be going more back and forth between identifying, explaining, and so on. All right, so we've summarized everything that we spoke about yesterday as well. Okay. And as a little exercise for you guys, before we move on, is I'd like you just to spend around 2 minutes or so finding an example of a special effect being used within your design. Remember, we spoke about that being the use of blurring images to create an effect, the use of a duotone color. We said there are 2 shades of a color. It can be anything from making something look a bit 3D, like a stamp, for example. With the motion blur, what's that doing for us? What's that telling? Cars going really fast. Now, for them to capture the image of the car and keep that in focus and blur out that background, be quite difficult, right? They'd need to make sure they're on time for that. But with making use of after editing techniques like adding an emotion blur, like you guys identified, and being able to keep the car still without any motion blur affecting it, that is, like you said, showcasing the speed in which this car can move at, showing you just how fast it can go. Right, so use of effects to further push the message, tell you the experience that you're going to get behind a product. And then another interesting example, this is more on the composition and editing side with being able to combine imagery, but this was talking about Dulux paint, showcase your style. And if you look at how they chose to show that, you've actually got the woman kind of wearing the paint splash like it's a dress. Now, if you look at this type of dress, where would you see this type of dress and style? Fashion Week. Yeah, you'd see it on Lady Gaga type aesthetics, you know, it's crazy, it's couture. You'd find it on, there's something, the Met Gala, that's what I was thinking about, where they have their themes and they dress up. Now, that is very high-end luxury, but we've paired that with paint, right? The color of paint. And that's telling us that this is such a luxury brand. It's a high-end, rich color. When you use this, your entire room is going to feel luxurious. And it's going to feel like you're going to be able to showcase your style. It's statement, because that's what a lot of those fashion dresses are about, making a statement. Okay, it's quite a unique shade of this purplish color as well. Right, so that's an interesting use of distorting the paint in such a way that it actually forms a dress around this woman. All right, so quite creative. Cool, so that is some practical examples of your special effects being used within your layouts and your magazine designs as well. All right, awesome. So let's go ahead and head out to break. When we come back, we'll speak more about magazines and so on, but I'll see you guys in around 15 or so. Yeah, I think I did give the magazines back to those I took it from, so it should be on your table. I'm trying to rage bait me. What are those? Those magazines. Fine. Okay, cool, guys. So, visuals we spoke about, typography we spoke about, passed out some pointers and some things to consider. What we're going to look at now are the components that make up a magazine layout. Okay, what each little element on that page is referred to as. Now, I don't mean this is referred to as a graphic, this is referred to as a piece of text, but they are actual names for almost every little piece that's on a page. For example, page numbers, headlines. We have what we refer to as a sidebar, for example, folios, which would be referred to as page numbers. So we're going to look at that in context of these designs and see where they've been used, what they are used for, and basically how they are built around within a magazine layout. So everyone's got their magazine, because as we're going in between, we'll stop to take a look and see where you can identify where these have been used. Some of them are pretty straightforward, like what is a headline, for example? What's a headline? Okay, I like that you said it's like a title but different, because it's meant to grab your attention. Okay, so a headline, as Sky has said, is there to grab the attention, right? Typically there to communicate that personality, and it's what you read first. For example, everyone's seen Harry Potter. I think I asked that question last week as well. If we look here at the example of this newspaper, the title isn't just talking about secrets. It doesn't just say secrets, right? It's actually a collection of words, Dumbledore's dark secrets revealed, that are arranged in such a way that it's kind of like gossip, almost. The way they've decided to communicate what the rest of this article is about. So not just saying Dumbledore, or want to know Dumbledore. It's there to capture our attention. And that's typically what we read first. And that's why it's much larger. It takes up more space. It's even formatted in a unique way as well, because Dumbledore is much larger than Dark Secrets Revealed, because it's there to stand out. Because, I mean, who was Dumbledore to everybody? He was like the greatest wizard there was, besides Voldemort, of course. But he was the good kind. And now Dumbledore's got dark secrets. People are interested in that. So your title is often catchy in a way that communicates, as we said, that personality of what this article was supposed to be about. Right? It was there like gossip, things that you wouldn't have really known about Dumbledore. That is the purpose of a headline. Then we get subheading. Now, what's a subheading? What's the purpose of a subheading? So, okay, so a subheading, we mustn't confuse it with being a headline or a title. The subheading is not the first thing people read, like a headline, to grab your attention. So if a subheading is not there to grab the attention, not quite. Okay, so a subheading, the answer here that Shreya gave was an introduction to a paragraph. Now there's another word for that type of usage in text. But a subheading is if I am talking about in my article, multiple different things, right? Multiple different concepts, rather than having it sit in one long read in columns. How is the reader supposed to know that they are reading about, for example, prenup agreement in this part of my article? How are they going to know that they're reading about the marriage license in this part of my article? Because my entire article here was about a wedding, the process of a wedding. Now I'm breaking down those concepts into multiple sections. So the purpose of the subheading does draw readers into their copy, but it's also there to break it up into easy to read pieces. So that if I'm explaining, like this magazine article, talking about the process of marriage, rather than just having all of my content read as one long story, I'm choosing to add in there a subheading, right, where it says prenuptial agreement, you're getting married, marriage license. I'm choosing to separate those parts of my article with a heading or subheading that stands out, so that the person knows that this is what they are going to be reading about in this paragraph of my article. Look at the way the subheading is treated compared to the rest of the text, the body copy that follows. Is it the same? It's not the same. Because again, if the subheading is there for me to know what I'm reading about, it needs to stand out, right? It needs to be visually different in size. You can see it's a little bit larger than my body copy. It's a different color. That's another way we could have made that subheading stand out, a different color from my body copy. It's also a bit of a different font as well. So the purpose of the subheading is to take your content and be able to break it up into bite-sized pieces. And that also helps guide my viewer's eye. It gives me more to look at than just long amounts of text within a column. So while it does draw attention in the sense that we've got a different color there, I can tell there's different sections, but it's mainly there to add context and make it more understandable as well. So a subheading is different from the title. The title is what comes first. That's what draws the people in. Subheading is to divide your content afterwards. Okay, so there is a difference between the two. Okay, all right, just give me a second here, that's stuck. And then of course we have body copy. So those are your three main components of a layout. A headline to capture attention, subheading to sort of break up your content and organize that, and then your body copy. That's your bulk of your text and what people are actually reading. Remember, we spoke about the typical size for body copy, which was, without reading the slides, 12 points. And you're allowed to go as small as 9 points. Any smaller, nobody's going to be able to read it. Even with the best eyesight in the world, you're going to need a magnifying glass. Now, that's not to say that that 9 to 12 points is for everything. That is usually for when you're looking at your magazine layouts. They're almost always the same sort of page size. But when you're dealing with other forms of page sizes, maybe something that's smaller like an A5 or something that's larger, then that point type is allowed to change. But for typical magazines, you would use 9 to 12 for body copy. Your subheadings and your headline can, of course, be larger than that to call out that attention. So, of course, there that point, smaller media requires smaller copy. You're not going to fit large text on a small page. So those are our three main components. So I'd like for you guys to identify where subheadings and a headline has been used. Not body copy, because you're going to find that, that's a given, but a headline and subheadings. And remember, headlines are there to capture your attention, make you want to read that article. There's more visuals. Got something. Okay, like this is, let me use this. This wouldn't be an example of a headline because this is the name of the magazine. For example, we have like People magazine, You magazine. The front cover will always have that same name, for example. So I still want to point that out to the guys. I'm going to take that. Yep. On the Edge of Paradise. Yeah, that's referred to as a headline as well. Okay, like if you want to read it, like what do they mean by On the Edge of Paradise? Cool. And then always something new. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. For example. Yeah. This would be what we refer to as more like footer elements because it's like a little bit smaller. You'd have to kind of actually be interested in this to read that. That would be regarded as a footer element. Okay. England's dream. Yeah. Okay, so that's for a good headline.
And then subheading.
Okay, there's no subheading.
This
wouldn't be considered subheading. There is another term for this type of text, but a subheading is, okay, so this one, of course, is just one long article. Yeah. I don't know if there's going to be subheadings in this, but let's see. Yeah, like this would be a subheading, for example. They can come up in different ways, but this is all about the same article. Like this being the headline.
Yeah.
So these are your subheadings.
So it can be spread across a few.
Yes. Yeah. Top secret.
Top secret.
Okay. The top secret is your headline. Yeah. Any use of subheadings in this? Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. Okay, cool. Let me use this one. Top secret. So has anyone managed to find the use of subheadings? It's quite, it's not something that you often find, but headlines, you're finding that everywhere. Yeah. A subheading. Yeah, it's almost like a Q&A sort of layout that's happening here. Yes. Living room. Yeah, that would be referred to as a subheading. Okay, so of course we could spend a lot of time looking and identifying subheadings, headlines, and so on, but just one or two things to point out to you. So as you guys have been looking at your magazines and seeing the headlines, you see how the headlines are worded, the type of phrases that they use to capture your attention. For example, let's put that down here. This headline literally starts with top secret. Okay, they're not telling me what the article is about yet. They're not telling me that they're going to be talking about Japanese cars, street cars, and racing. That comes afterwards. But by having just the phrase top secret, large and bold and standing out as my headline, I want to be in on the secrets because we are naturally nosy people. We always want to know the secrets of others, ins and outs. We like that. And that's, of course, why Dumbledore's Dark Secrets was the headline in that newspaper. So Headlines are there to capture attention, and again, they can be witty, they can have a pun in them to communicate personality. Now, here's another example, but this isn't an example of a headline. This was just to clear up any bits of confusion on where headlines can be found. Headlines are typically at the start of your article. You're not going to find a headline on the front cover of a magazine. You'll find what you'll be reading about with different articles, but we mustn't confuse this as being a headline, because what is this actually? This is the name of the publication, the name of the magazine. So People magazine, You magazine, Vogue will always have their name in the front in some way, shape, or form. And it'll always be the biggest thing on the page. So don't confuse this part of text on your page or the front cover of a magazine as being a headline. That's the title or the name of the series of the magazine you are reading. All right. Same with this as well. South Africa Deluxe. Here's an example of subheadings. So subheadings can be formatted in many different ways to suit the style of the article, and it also depends on how the designer has laid that out. But looking at this, you're not going to be able to read it, but essentially, this little sort of brownish gold piece of text. Let's see if I can, that's the purpose of these nails. All right, so kind of here to just point out where the subheading is. Now, sometimes subheadings can be like the marriage one where it says marriage license, prenuptial agreement, straightforward. That's what I'm talking about. And sometimes, depending on the style of the article, this subheading is actually a question. It's kind of like a Q&A article, a question, and this is the person's answer. But each question has become the subheading. So I know what this answer is talking about. It's not just completely like a random train of thought. People just put down what they were thinking as they were going in this magazine. So this is an example of a subheading and how it's formatted. There are better ways to format this, because looking at this first, if they didn't change the color of this because the body copy is white, I would think that this is just a short paragraph in between, because it looks exactly the same as the rest of the body copy. Right? The only thing saving it is the change of color, but perhaps making it larger, bringing it closer to the answer that it's speaking to, that could help as well. All right, and those were the three that I wanted to show to you guys. Okay, so subheadings, kind of rare as you're seeing them in the magazines. Most of it is going to be headlines. And then, of course, we saw the body copy there as well. All right, so that was our three main components for that layout. Let's look at a few others that are going to be fairly new to us as well. So we've been through headline, we've been through subheading, and we've been through body copy. Now we have something called a caption. Okay, I'm going to go to the slide before that. And can anyone tell me what a caption is? Okay, and you are correct. Piece of text that you would put typically underneath an image so that people can know about what this image is speaking about, adding in a bit more context. For example, if I'm doing an article and I have a picture of a person, instead of just people wondering, who is that person? Where are they? I'd have a small piece of text underneath the image explaining or just giving a brief description on who's in the image. So-and-so is to the left, their partner is to the right at the Met Gala 2014, for example. This example was a crab. And then it's just a short little caption, description of what was happening in this image. It ventures out from its safe haven. So it's not just a random picture of a crab. It's giving a bit of context behind it. So where else would you see captions being used? Okay, so we're referring to captions in use of video. And you are correct, that is referred to as a caption, words that pop up at the bottom of your screen, but that's usually a direct translation of what the person is saying. Captions in the context of layout design and graphic design is, like your previous answer, pieces of text underneath or usually underneath an image to explain what's happening in them, to bring some content or context and link it to the rest of the article. So it explains the pictures, turns the browsers into readers because I want to know what's happening in that image. And like you said, typically found underneath it. They can come in many other forms. It's not always underneath the image. For example, the normal is boring. That's the caption. Right? That is our statement piece for why she is doing a backflip on the beach. Not the most weird, out of the box thing someone could do, but in this case, maybe this was strange at the time, right? Doing backflips on the beach. So that's why the caption there is normal is boring, short, to the point, catchy, and it explains the image and it gives contents. So you typically see captions on social media. I'm sure when you guys post to Instagram, you add a little caption there at the bottom. If you're like me, you just leave it blank because you don't know what to say, or you just add an emoji. Exactly. You just add an emoji, something that explains where you were in this image, what you were doing, what event you were at. That is the form of a caption. Social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, you can add captions as well, but who really reads TikTok captions? More focused on the video itself. So yes, captions are little pieces of text underneath an image to give it some context. What we can also find in a magazine layout, a typical magazine layout, is something called a masthead. Anyone heard of that term before? Masthead. Now, a masthead is when you're looking through your magazines. Let me pull up an example here. Okay. A masthead will typically appear at the top of a magazine layout or page layout, right? Usually at the top. And it's a repeating, my sense of direction, it's a repeating element that will showcase itself throughout the magazine. Formatted the same way, the font is the same, maybe the color will change, but the text may also change as well. The purpose of a masthead is to tell me what section of the magazine I am in. Am I in the home and living section? Am I in the fashion and jewelry section? Am I in the, for example, job vacancies section? That is the purpose of a masthead. So it's unique to the style of the magazine, but you typically find it, as we've got here in the examples. Oops, let's go back. Right at the top, and it's there to show me in the sections of the magazine that I am reading to. So if you guys go ahead and flip through your magazines, let's see where captions and mastheads have been used. So repeating elements for a masthead once more, repeating elements throughout the magazine, telling me the section that I am at. Yeah, that's an example. Why do you think a masthead is important? What's the purpose of it? Why would I want to know the section of the magazine that I'm reading? But depending on what these are, like little adverts. And I'm assuming for each person. Heroes, yeah. Options, what's this for? Rugs. Yeah, so they're explaining what the pattern is in the image. Okay. Anyone got an answer for me? What would be the purpose of a masthead? Shreya? Or you had an example? Okay, who's got the answer for me? Andrew? Helps the person navigate what we're reading. So when you guys are seeing your articles, some of them are quite long. They span over a couple of pages. Now, if I am to know what the article I'm reading is about without having to flip back and find the heading and the title, I look to the top at the masthead and I know this article is talking about what was happening on set of what movie just came out recently. Medea. There's another Medea movie. I know what I'm doing tonight. Thank you. It's not nice. No, but like when has the recent Medea movies been nice? Not the same. When could you? All right, but yeah, so if there's an article talking about Tyler Perry's Medea movies and he's got a lot and it's spanning over like 10 pages, if I am to remember who I'm reading about, I would look at the masthead because it's telling me Tyler Perry success. That's the section of the magazine that I'm in. I'm in fashion, I'm in home and living, for example. All right, so that's masthead. Oh, we've got a lot of subheadings in there. Yeah, business. Cool. And more business. Okay, so you got it. Anyone manage to find this caption? Caption, not a question. The fashion caption. Okay, so here's an example of quite a uniquely done masthead. Remember, they're a unique style to the magazine itself. Now, this one, almost in itself, looks like a little graphic. But here, Country Life, that's the magazine that I'm reading. And at the top corner, they've got Country Life again, but then they've got lifestyle. So I'm reading the lifestyle section. Then later on, I'm reading Heritage of Country Life. Same exact layout, graphic, just the color has been changed to maybe match the article that it is talking to. And then there's another one on the side as well. Okay, that's arts and crafts. So that is a masthead. So I think we've all got it, what a masthead is about, what it's for. Pardon? Fashion. Okay, cool. Right, it's there to tell me the section that we are in. Thank you. And they're unique to the magazine itself. Exactly, yes. And here an example of captions. So again, we see it's not just straightforward text under an image. Captions can be done in a range of ways. For example, this particular layout is talking about the build of a car, right? And they've got multiple little images around here focusing on certain aspects of it, but it's not there just to add images, make it look cool, show me a diagram. They've also added in a little bit of a caption explaining what it is this image is showcasing. It's giving context behind it. So this is an example of a caption. I'm saying this car was inspired by Batman. It's just blue though. Okay, awesome, guys. So you can just take a second then to tie up what you're looking at. Bandile, can I just have your magazine back? I have your magazine back. There's something in here that I want to use. Do you remember where the top secret was? Hey, fast, thank you. Okay. All right. Now let's put names to some of the pieces you guys were identifying and calling out in some of your answers. Remember I said that there were certain phrases for that or certain terms for that already. So let's look at them. For example, Shreya, you mentioned one of the aspects we looked at was a sentence that was leading in, for example. There's a term for that. Another example here that you typically find is something called a kicker or a deck. Now, this is not to be confused with the headline. This typically runs after the headline. So the headline was therefore capturing attention. It's large, it's bold. Doctor stabbed by patient. Now I'm like, oh my God, what happened here? Where was this? Was this at the hospital that's closest to me? Because I'm not going to want to go there now. I want to know the story. Then I go and I see what we refer to as the kicker. That is the line or sentence directly after. And what is the purpose of the kicker now when reading that? Drama in clinic as elderly man hurts medical officer while undergoing checkup. That is providing some context to the heading. right? The kicker there is your summary, typically of what this article is talking about, that's underneath the headline, providing a bit more context now about what actually happened to this doctor that was stabbed. By who? Where were they, for example? And it's saying here an elderly man was the one that did it. So coming back to a previous example that I brought up that one of you guys pointed out, where we saw the top secret, here's the kicker underneath. Top secret. I want to know what the secret is about. And directly after, the kicker. Japanese tuning gods build the ultimate, and then there's some numbers after that. The ultimate car. I'm going to summarize it that way. And that is my kicker, because now that's the top secret. That's what I'm going to be reading about. That's what it's talking about. So it's adding in more interest and buy-in for me to now want to read the rest of this article, because that is the secret that they are going to be sharing with me. So don't confuse it with the headline. Okay, it comes after your headline. All right. So let's see. Actually, we'll do that after. So the kicker comes after your headline. And there's another example here. 5-wicket victory. Dhoni plays a decisive role, for example. That's quite eye-catching. I know it's a victory. And then my kicker there, for example, is it's a decisive role. Right. Then, of course, you also have little parts at the top. So we usually have a sentence that runs underneath our headline. That's coming in after. So let's see in your magazines if you guys can find in a kicker and a deck. Sorry, guys, just to clarify once more, just so we're not creating confusion here. You have a kicker and then you have a deck. The first example is your deck. That's coming in after your headline. Your kicker is the starting point, where you have something interesting that provides a bit of context that comes before the heading. So the deck is underneath your headline, your kicker, because when you say something kicks off, something starts. So your kicker becomes before your heading. All right, both there to provide some context behind this article, what we are talking about, and so on. Right, and then when you guys were pointing out examples to me, you were showing me one-liners where I said that that was actually referred to as a deck and not a subheading, because sometimes that can be confused for each other. So remember, deck is underneath, kicker at the top. Okay. 100 spirits. I will move out of that and run those 19 dots. All right, so use this as an example. This month's cap. This is a little bit more like this would be referred to as something we call the drop cap, because it's a letter that's stylized differently in a way that it takes up a couple of lines, and it even kind of looks like a little graphic or artwork. You know, like in fantasy movies and storybooks, you have like that big ornate letter. That will be referred to as a drop cap.
Okay, so not a
Yeah, not a leading. We get to that together. All right. So we've been through mastheads. What was a masthead? Okay, a little piece of text. In some cases, it was taking on a blocky design that was at the top of our magazine page, telling us the section we were in. We've looked at captions, a kicker, and a deck. Remember, that is another sentence that either typically comes before the headline, which is a kicker, or a deck that comes after the headline. That is now providing more context along the entire article and the headline itself. We looked at the doctor one, for example. Then we looked at lead-ins, typically first sentence or words of a paragraph that's formatted differently to bring forth attention as well, and also to emphasize the starting point. Now we have other sections or other placements within a magazine that's referred to as a header and a footer. Now a header and a footer is similar to the masthead in the sense that it's reoccurring across the entire magazine. And it's text that's reoccurring across the entire magazine. For example, I'll show you this one over here. right at the bottom of my page, not to be confused with the heading, subheading, because it's not as large as the rest of it. It is small and to the bottom of my page, quite far down, where it's giving me some context here on perhaps the date of this issue, for example. Right, that is my footer because it's at the bottom of the page. If it was at the top of the page, which some magazines do have, it'll have the name of the magazine, typically maybe the issue, the year that it was in. That would be referred to as a header. Okay, so it is extra subsidiary information that's reoccurring across the magazine, either at the top or the bottom of a page. And sometimes they'd even include a page number in there as well. This falls under your footer section. Okay, so some magazines have them at the top, some have them at the bottom, of course. I think some of you would have seen that they were at the top, and this one they're at the bottom. Let's see if you've got another example here. Okay, so don't confuse it with the masthead, where the masthead told me the section that I was in. The footer is not telling me the section that I'm in for this magazine. It's telling me the page number, and it's telling me the issue. This was April 2023. That is the issue for this Get It magazine. That's what it's called. It's even got the name of the publication in here as well. Why would we have that repeating element across our pages? What's the purpose of having that there? Okay, it's repeating. It's referred to as what we call repetition. It's further reinforcing the magazine that you are reading. Okay, what publication? Are you reading People magazine? Are you reading the You magazine, for example? What year? Imagine if the magazine didn't have the year, the issue, 2023, and it was talking about sales, it was talking about fashion collections, for example. How would I know now when this was happening? So they would include things like the issue and the year repeating throughout the magazine so that it's constant and it's ingrained into your memory as well. And that's where what you would find in your headers and your footers. Also in there, which I brought up, is something called a folio. Anyone heard of this word before? Folio. This is also known as page numbering. So when we use the word in class, for example, add folios to your magazine layout, we're talking about page numbers. Identify and state, this is page 1, this is page 2, for example. So page numbering, that's typically at the bottom corners of each publication. And that also falls in your footer, for example. Because if we have a look at this, it's giving me my folio, but it also says Ultimate Cycling Australia, which is the magazine itself. It's repeating the magazine name as part of my footer. So those two can be found quite close together and often paired together within your magazines. So header and footer and folios. Any questions from you guys so far? Okay, I'm sure you didn't realize that every aspect and part of a magazine had a name. Every little element, even the headline, that little sentence underneath it, it had a name because they each serve a purpose within your article. And then we have something called a sidebar. Now, sidebar is in the name. It's typically on the side of your magazine page. But what is the purpose of the sidebar? Essentially, if we have a look at this magazine article, okay, the black area is my main article. It's talking about the internet, it's talking about social media, and so on. Then I have this thin strip of orange on the side, almost like a bar, referred to as a sidebar, that also has information in it. However, it's not formatted the same way as the rest of my article. It's different. It's a different color. It's using a different setup entirely. There's lines dividing the sections. The purpose of the sidebar is to add in more information that relates to my article. So while this article is talking about technology and internet and so on, the sidebar is giving me the history of something that's related to technology, related to the internet aspects that it's talking about. So where it wasn't meant to be included as part of my article is housing my main information. The sidebar is giving supportive material that relates to the article itself. Can be attention grabbing as well, as you've seen with the different format. For example, if I was doing an article on, let's say, you're a famous artist. Okay, the article is to maybe talk about, let's say, Tyler. I'm sure everyone's listened to Tyler before. That's my article. I'm interviewing Tyler and I'm writing an entire piece on her. My main body copy will be about what she was speaking about in the interview, telling a bit of her story. Maybe it's taking on a Q&A. What information would I put in my sidebar? The article is telling us about her story, how she came about being a successful artist, for example. Right? Exactly, mentioning some of her songs. Because we're not necessarily talking about the specific song in the article. We're wanting to hear about how she got famous, how she feels, what was her story, her journey. And in the sidebar, I'm giving you guys extra material to read on what she does, her songs, maybe the awards that she won in the amount of years. That is the purpose of a sidebar, to give extra supportive material on the article itself. Okay, and you of course can format that, design that in a way that contrasts so that we don't confuse it with being part of the actual article, because there is a bit of a disconnect in the formatting itself. Okay, so that's header and footer, folios, and a sidebar. Let's see if you guys can find sidebars. An example of a sidebar. A header and footer is guaranteed. You're going to find that. Folios as well. Okay, I've got two examples here for you. Okay, let's look at this one first. Now, we have a look at this. There is a sidebar being used here, but I want to point out, of course, the design of it as well. Now, this article starts on the previous page itself. Okay, it's talking about the Audi and the car, and this is how the article itself starts. Now, if I go on to the second page, there's the rest of my article happening. And then I've got some extra information on the left-hand side, where it's now breaking away from the article and it's sort of explaining to us what Derek's favorite features were about the car. He didn't mention it in our main body copy. That's not what the article was talking about. But we asked him some other questions afterwards where we said Derek's favorite features, Megan's favorite features, and so on. So obviously this article was mainly talking about the car itself and who was designing the car. But then as part of our sidebar, we decided to include what the favorite features of the people were. However, it does kind of almost can be confused as being part of the main article itself. Because in the sense that the formatting is quite similar. The only thing telling me this is a sidebar is what? It has a black background. It's contrasting, which is not something the other page had. In fact, it had it, but with imagery. So it's got a contrasting color, right? It's almost kind of sectioning this area off for me. Hey, it does have a bolder heading here or subheading for each of them. And it is also paired with an image. And that's what's telling me that this is separate from the article, but it is supporting information. And then we've got another example, sidebar, that's talking about arrivals and departures. Now, of course, to understand the sidebar, we need some more context on the rest of the article. The rest of the article was talking about places to visit, famous landmarks and places to visit. So the sidebar was talking about the types of travel packages that you could look at. For example, train and so on. And then it's boring bagels. This is more on the excursion for food in these particular areas. So it's providing you on some information and activities that you could perhaps do in each of these locations. Where in the main article, it was talking about the history behind it. But in my sidebar, I'm explaining or giving context on activities that you could do and visit, tours that are happening within those areas. And that's going to then sort of convince us to want to go and visit these places as well. All right, so do we get the meaning of a sidebar and how we saw that they were formatted differently also? Thank you. And okay. And of course, you guys also saw some areas where sidebars weren't being used. Not something that you force in, we use it when necessary if we've got extra context to add in. And then lastly, in our entire puzzle piece of a magazine and a magazine layout is a pull quote. Taking something directly from the interviewee's mouth, the person that this article is speaking about or talking about, and taking what they said from the body copy itself and making it larger and bolder so that it stands out. Why would I do something like that? Why would I take a particular phrase from my article and format it in such a way that it stands out? It becomes almost like its own graphic and visual piece. Okay? Okay, it's like the main point to all of the writing. Perhaps this is something important that we wanted you to take away, something that was going to impact you when you read it. So a pull quote, again, taken from the article, can be something somebody said as well, and it's formatted and made larger in a way that it becomes a visual graphic. They even color in font, in size. This designer decided to put it in the middle of the body copy itself. So it kind of breaks your attention and it sort of wants you to focus in the middle. So that is a pull quote. They're to capture attention, but also, as we said, the reader or whoever wrote this wanted you to take that point away from this article. It needed to make an impact. Okay, let's see if you can find a pull quote being used. That's exactly like the one that we looked at as well. Piece taken, yeah. Yes, that is. What? Fun, normally so eager. A lot of us are finding very similar formatted pull quotes where they're in the middle of the body copy and they're taking up across the two columns. Some of us have managed to find where the piece is directly pulled forth and made bold and darker and standing out. And you'd also see the types of phrases they're pulling through. They're not just taking a random sentence. They're taking something that's going to have impact, either something that's going to be a bit funny, a fun fact that the person mentioned during the interview and they chose to highlight that as part of the pull quote. That's the pieces they are using. They're not taking something like, I was born in X, Y, and Z and making that the pull quote, or my favorite color is this. That's not the pull quote, because I'm not going to read an article to find out what this person's favorite color is or why they're talking about their favorite color. I'm going to read the article if the pull quote says, I wasn't sure I was going to make it out that day. That is impactful. That's going to draw attention. So when you guys are designing, hint, hint, your own magazine, eventually, in a couple of weeks. Yeah. You guys know we're starting software next week. Right? Everyone knows InDesign, magazine, multi-page layout software. So that is why we are going through things like this, to identify where it's being used, to understand it, so that you can also eventually use it in your own design. So that's why I'm saying, if you're going to be using something like a pull quote, you need to make sure whatever the quote is interesting, it's impactful, it's making me want to read the article. If your headline isn't standing out, as you've been seeing in some of these examples, then your pull quote is standing out and it's calling attention. And I'm wanting to find out, what did this person go through that they didn't think they were going to survive? Not why their favorite color is purple or pink. So we need to make sure we're also choosing the right phrases for that pull quote as well. Okay. Making for Mars in many ways a lot more dangerous than the race itself. Okay, cool. All right, here's an example, the pull quote being used quite interestingly. So we've got this article. It's making use of captions, as you can see with some of the imagery. And we do have, let's see, a little quote here that's part of the body copy. But now that may be easy to miss because when we're reading, as we established yesterday, a lot of us don't read every single individual word. We skim through it to get the general idea. So the designer and the interviewer said they wanted their quote to stand out, have more impact. So we took the same quote and we actually made it part of our visual piece as well. The exact same phrase, word for word, making the film was, in many ways, a lot more dangerous than the race itself, because that was now how he felt when he was making this film. That was an important part of his journey. And they made that larger. They even formatted it, kind of looks like a marker that was written on that image, handwritten. Gives you a personal feeling as well. That is a good example of a pull quote. It's interesting. I kind of want to know now, what film was he making that people were racing to make this film? Because you don't hear about that often, people racing to make a certain type of film. Usually it's to make a product, but not really a film. So perhaps this film was on the first person to ever make a car, and they didn't have a film on that, so he wanted to do so. That's some context there. So that is an example of the pull quote. You guys got any questions for me there? No, you don't. You see here in this example, it doesn't use quotation marks. So you typically, when you hear the word quote, you associate it with the exclamation marks. But because this is coming directly from the body copy, you don't need to use that. If you want to specify that it's something they said word for word, then you can use your marks at the top. But if it's just the actual regular body copy, you don't have to. Okay, cool. So you guys have already been on the Learn Port. So I just want to point out and so on your notes before we cover anything new here. Okay, so I've seen you guys have already opened this up or have been opening this up and looking at it, which is good. And this, of course, has a summary of everything that we have been chatting about, as well as examples and so on for you to look at. So when it comes time for when you are designing your own layouts, you need a reminder on what to look for when you're studying for any quizzes or tests. This is what you will reference as well. Okay, so that is your typography notes. All right, now in saying that, we've spoken a lot about the layouts and so on. Now that you guys know this information, and like I said, you will eventually be putting this into practice, where else could this already become useful for you? You guys remember your idea files that you did recently, all right, that I went and took a look at as well, saw what you guys were putting in there. Everybody was on the right track. Now that we've learned about typography and the elements of a magazine, you can go back to your idea files and add in examples of sidebars, add in examples of how pull quotes have been designed, how headlines have been designed, because that's the purpose of an idea file. If I am not sure how to design the sidebar, I can go to my idea file, see what people have done, get some inspiration there, get some context. So the idea file, although you guys submitted that, that's still an ongoing exercise for you guys. That will now go beyond Keyline, outside into your work, into industry. You'll be constantly adding that, but you started that here with us. Okay, so wherever you can is that beyond just reading the notes, actually go and still look at practical examples of it. Get some inspiration for yourself. Save them, keep them. If you're reading physical books as well, magazines, cut those out if you can, if your parents aren't going to shout at you, of course. But do so. Okay, if you guys do get your hands on some magazines. Cool. So that was our elements of a layout. Okay, sidebar, full quote, headers, footers, kicker, and deck. But of course, we started off with our three main components. Headline, body copy, and what else? Okay, kickers was one that we looked at. Subheadings, correct. All right, cool. Okay, let's start a little bit of a topic here before we end off for today. Again, just with what we've been discussing and so on, but this is more so on things that you would consider when creating your designs. So we spoke again about the layouts and the typography. Now here's what you would consider when choosing a type of font. What you would consider when choosing what to create and make a pull quote or what images to use. How can you match it to the context of your article? Okay, so the first thing you'd want to do when you are creating any type of layout and design, right, whether it's for a client or for a particular type of brand, you want to determine, or the first thing you want to decide is, what is the personality that you want to project with your design? Hey, why should I know the type of personality that I want to give off with my design? What is that going to help me decide? If I'm wanting to be serious and sad and mysterious, what visuals, what colors am I going to use? What fonts am I going to use with my particular design? So that is why you need to know a little bit about who's going to be reading this, who's going to be receiving this. That's going to help you determine the character you want to project. So having a look at the examples there, we all know Nando's. What's Nando's personality? They're funny, right? They're quite witty, a little bit controversial with their adverts sometimes. And that's why people like them, because they're kind of like, they speak the truth, or they say what's on everybody's minds, things that you wouldn't really be saying out loud. And in doing so, they've created that type of personality for themselves. But they needed to do so in a way where they chose or used the right colors. They chose the right font, for example, something that was still consistent with their brand. So when you're determining the character that you want to project, of course, you chat to your clients, they have their own ideas. You want to make sure that you're matching your design to these characteristics. But you also want to make a list of some attributes that you want to consider when using within a particular type of design. What are you trying to put across? What colors should be used? What fonts should we use? Like we've mentioned it before. So that is what it means to determine the character of the project and what you should start to consider. If you look at Snickers as well, Snickers does very well with their adverts and their designs. They're also trying to make you have a little laugh. They want you to feel happy with their advert. They want you to be left with a happy experience. So it's, oh dear, it's hard to, I don't even know how you say that, it's spell, but you're saying it as spell, for example. And saying, if you keep making these typing mistakes, grab yourself a Snickers fast. And then they'll say, you know, you're not, have a break, have a Kit Kat, for example. That's the type of wording that they use, the type of visual connection that they're trying to create with you. And even they've gone and they've changed the logo of that Snickers bar as well to tell us that it's still going beyond just the adverts. It's affecting other parts as well. But that's now us taking our brand colors, our brand fonts, our product, our imagery, and arranging it in a way that we are communicating a certain personality or character to our customers, similar to Nando's and their cheeky and witty commentary during their adverts. So that's what it means to determine the character. And then, of course, we've got Nike, which is quite straightforward. You can't stop sport, but they've got us in graffiti red. It's meant to impact you. It's meant to be strong. All right, does that make sense? Okay. So the first thing you'd want to do is know your audience when it comes to creating any type of design or layout or advert. Why do I need to know who's buying my product or who I'm trying to appeal to? So I know how to advertise it, how to brand it. So what are some elements of my design that I'll need to take into consideration? Having a look at this advert, for example, the product there is it's a power drill. That's what it's advertising. And then I needed to have a piece of text. Something that was visually witty to grab the attention. But what font did I use? Script. So who am I targeting? Probably don't want to say it. Hey, who am I targeting? If I've got this big, powerful drill here, we can see we've got the man that's grabbing it, and we've got the charging block and the electricity. I need to consider the other parts of my design to help push that message. I can't now use a script font that's dainty, that's flowing and has twirls and curves for something like a powerful drill. That's just not going to work. It's not communicating the same character or personality. What type of font would I use here instead? Well, it could be a substitute font. Decorative, so maybe something that's textured, something that looks a little bit like a stone wall, for example. That's a good idea. Sans serif, bold, for example, something that's sort of thick and strong. That's what I want to use to communicate. Power tools make me feel powerful. That font gives me a feeling of ballet. Okay, it makes me feel like maybe the drill is so strong, I'm going to go spinning instead. But that's not matching the message and my target audience. So we need to know who should be appealing to so that we are able to choose things like the typeface and the font style that you are going for. Okay, if you are creating a jewelry company, for example, that specializes in diamonds and dainty jewelry, you're not going to then use a decorative font that's all grunge and has texture to it. That's not matching the mood of what you are trying to communicate to people. So that dainty typeface is not suitable for a power tool advert, but it would work well for wedding invitations. So if your audience is very young, for example, or very old, you'd also have other things to consider, like the size of the text that you use on your design. If your advert or your layout is specifically targeted towards the elderly, text. You're going to want to work with a bolder size of text, a bolder font, so that it stands out more to them, so it's more readable. So you need to think again about the experience that your readers are going to get. Right, if you're aiming here, another example at an executive audience, emphasize important points. For example, if you want to emphasize the amount of money something has made, you want to emphasize facts within your article, then you would want to use like a bold piece of font. So that's what it means by knowing your audience, being able to tell what they're actually going to capture and take away from your design. And that is then how you would choose your font. So to communicate your personality and also make sure it's readable for your audience. It appeals to them and their age range. All right, we'll talk a lot more about things like target audience and so on when we speak more about creating your brands, but this is a little bit of an introduction to that. Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead and stop here for today about discussing our audience and the right tools. Tomorrow, we'll continue of course, but you guys can go ahead and just hand your magazines back when you are coming past. Reminder, what's due tomorrow? Your brand. Yes, your brand development 1, of course. All right, cool, guys. Enjoy the rest of the day. See you tomorrow. If anyone's staying behind, we do have a class happening here around 1.